What is it that makes this relic so special? Imagine holding something in your hands that might be the very cloth that covered Jesus Christ after his crucifixion. Yes, you heard that right. There's a piece of fabric called the Shroud of Turin, and for centuries it has sparked endless debate and intrigue. Some believe this ancient linen could be the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ himself, while others say it's just a clever medieval fake. But recent studies have brought forward shocking new evidence. Is this finally the proof we've been waiting for? Keep watching, because what you're about to learn might just change everything you thought you knew about the Shroud of Christ. Additionally, in the end, we will share the journey the shroud took to reach Vatican City and who first possessed it before it gained widespread fame.
The Shroud of Turin is one of the most mysterious and controversial relics in the world. Throughout history, it has fascinated people, historians, scientists, believers, and skeptics alike. Why? Because the shroud is believed by many to be the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ. It shows the faint image of a man who seems to have suffered wounds very similar to those described in the crucifixion of Christ. But with so much debate and skepticism surrounding this cloth, how can we know for sure? What is it that makes this relic so special? And more importantly, what is this new, solid evidence that can tell us once and for all that it's real and not fake? In early 2018, researchers in Rome revealed a groundbreaking 3D carbon copy of what they believe Jesus Christ looked like, based on the dimensions of the Shroud of Turin. The shroud is a 14-foot linen cloth thought to have wrapped the body of Jesus after his crucifixion. This new statue is a full-size, three-dimensional representation of the man seen on the shroud, crafted with precision using the exact measurements taken from the cloth. Giulio Fanti, a professor of mechanical and thermal measurements and an expert on the shroud, led the research team responsible for this incredible creation. For over 20 years, Professor Fanti has dedicated himself to studying the shroud, using detailed analysis to determine the dimensions of the body imprinted on it. From these measurements, they were able to construct the 3D carbon copy of Jesus. According to the data, Jesus was nearly 5 feet 11 inches tall, significantly taller than the average man of that time, who stood around 5 feet 5 inches. The researchers believe they have finally captured an accurate depiction of Jesus, down to the most minute details. One of the most striking aspects of the statue is its depiction of the physical trauma Jesus endured. Based on the marks seen on the shroud, they concluded that Jesus received over 600 blows during his torture. The wounds are clearly reflected in the sculpture, with Fanti himself stating that he was able to count 370 distinct marks on the body, not including the injuries to the sides, which the shroud does not reveal since it only covered the front and back. Professor Fanti estimates that, considering all factors, Jesus likely sustained around 600 blows. Fanti remarked on the remarkable effort that went into this project, explaining that they used the most advanced 3D technologies to study the shroud's image for years, ultimately creating this life-size model. The University of Padua and Padua Hospital collaborated with sculptor Sergio Rodella to craft the physical representation of Jesus. Now, here's the part that will blow your mind. After all the studies, all the tests, and all the debates, one piece of evidence stands out as the most convincing proof yet that the Shroud of Turin is the true burial cloth of Christ. It's the forensic analysis of the image on the cloth. According to experts, the way the bloodstains are arranged and the image of the body on the cloth could not have been created by human hands. The level of detail and the precision in the image is far beyond what anyone in the Middle Ages could have achieved. In fact, some believe that the image was created by a burst of radiation or energy, something so powerful that it left an imprint on the cloth itself. Could this be the moment when Christ's body was resurrected? Is this the evidence we've been waiting for to finally prove the shroud's authenticity? It's a question that still leaves many stunned. Even the most skeptical scientists have had a hard time explaining how the image was formed. Could this be the final piece of the puzzle? The last solid evidence that proves the Shroud of Christ is real?
We have an image that's neither painted, nor photographed, nor scorched, nor rubbed, or in any way made by the hand of a man. The image on the shroud is definitely not manufactured, meaning made intentionally to fool us?
This shroud has been wrapped around the body of a man who was tortured, flagellated, crowned with thorns, crucified, at the time of the Roman Empire. All of which corresponds to what the Gospels tell us concerning Jesus.
The Shroud of Turin provides a great challenge for science. It's a challenge because it's a piece of cloth that contains an image with physical properties unlike any other image I have ever seen, or anyone has ever seen. I have spent 32 years studying it. 32 years, half my life studying it, and yet I still don't have the answers. The man I worked with from Los Alamos called me again, and he said, "Barry, what do you know about the Shroud of Turin?" And I laughed. I said, "But I'm Jewish." And he said, "Me too." He was also Jewish. And he said, and explained to me that at that point a number of scientists had taken a photo of the shroud, and he said they were so amazed that this image has such properties, they were going to put together a team of scientists to see if they could get permission to go to Turin and examine the shroud to try and determine how this image was formed. About 2 months into the project, I remember saying to one of the other team members, "What is a Jewish boy like me doing on this?" And he laughed and he said, "You forgot that the man on the shroud is Jewish?" And I said, "No, I know this, I know." And then he gave me the best advice, maybe, of my whole life. He said, "Barry, go to Turin, do the best job you can do. God doesn't tell us in advance what the plan is, but one day you'll know." And this was great advice. And that kept me on the team. I was going to quit. But because of his words, from God maybe, through his lips, I stayed on the team. But the most important property of the shroud's image is the fact that the distance between the cloth and the body made the density of the image change. So the closer it was, the darker the image. The further away, the lighter the image. So the image on the shroud is not just from contact, because it worked at a distance from the body. So the correlation of cloth to body distance yielded different densities of the image. So when we looked at it with the VP8, we saw the natural relief of a human form. Now, how do we make images like that? We cannot duplicate this. And this three-dimensional information is the only image in the world that has this property.
The use of VP8 image analyzer on the Shroud of Turin was a significant moment in the study of the artifact's authenticity. The VP8 is a device originally designed to convert brightness values from photographs into three-dimensional relief images. What made its application to the Shroud of Turin fascinating was the way it interpreted the image on the shroud. When scientists fed a photograph of the Shroud of Turin into the VP8 in the late 1970s, they made an unexpected discovery. Typically, the VP8 only creates a 3D image from photos where brightness corresponds to actual distance from the camera. However, the shroud's image was different. Instead of a typical flat or distorted rendering, the VP8 revealed a detailed, proportional 3D relief of a human figure. This result suggested that the intensity of the image on the shroud corresponded to the distance between the cloth and the body it covered, which is unusual for typical photographs or paintings. The image of the man on the shroud could be displayed in 3 dimensions, something that doesn't happen with regular photos of painted or drawn images. This strongly suggested that the shroud's image wasn't produced by traditional artistic methods. It indicated that the image might have been created by some form of interaction between the cloth and a real three-dimensional body. The VP8 revealed an even and proportional distribution of light intensity across the image, meaning that the darker parts of the image seemed to correspond to areas where the shroud was closer to the body, like the nose and brow, and the lighter parts corresponded to areas where the shroud would have been further from the body, like the cheeks and chin. The VP8 analysis contributed to the argument that the image on the shroud was not made by paint or any other external pigment applied by an artist's hand. If it had been a painted image, the VP8 would not have been able to produce such a coherent 3D relief. This reinforced the idea that the shroud's image might have been created by some other process. The VP8 results did not directly prove the shroud's authenticity as the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, but they fueled more speculation about the shroud's origin. Since the 3D characteristics of the image were so unusual, some proponents of the shroud's authenticity argued that the image could only have been created by a miraculous process, such as the resurrection of Christ, where some unknown energy or force created the imprint.
This is where the mystery deepens, and the truth becomes even more unsettling, especially in our modern age. What makes this so shocking is that, even now as we speak, the Shroud of Christ still has the blood in its best original color. Even after all these centuries, the blood on the cloth remains red. Yes, you heard that right. Red, not brown as dried blood typically turns. Now, why is this so significant? Typically, when blood dries, it turns brown. This is a well-known scientific fact. Yet on the shroud, we see red blood. This strange phenomenon is one of the biggest arguments for the authenticity of the shroud, because it defies what we know about how blood behaves after death. Recently, samples of the blood have been analyzed by scientists, and what they found is nothing short of shocking. These tests confirmed that the blood is human, specifically type AB, which is not just rare, but is often linked to populations in ancient Jewish communities. The discovery has sparked a wave of excitement, especially for those who believe this could be a direct link to Jesus Christ himself.
That stopped me from accepting the shroud as authentic for years, 18 years. The blood on the shroud is still red. Old blood should be black or brown. And no one could answer for 18 years, why is the blood on the shroud still red? And then in 1995, in a telephone conversation with Dr. Alan Adler, Jewish blood chemist who proved, by the way, the blood on the shroud was blood, proved it. He and I were on the telephone just having a conversation. And then he told me something I'd never known before. When someone is tortured over an extended period of time, 24 hours, 36 hours, right around the time of Jesus' torture, the body goes into shock. Jesus was given no water, he was beaten, he was scourged. Consequently, he went into anaphylactic shock. After a period of time in this type of shock, the cell walls of the red blood cells begin to break down. And the liver floods the body, the bloodstream, with an enzyme called bilirubin. And when that happens, the blood stays red forever. And when I found that out, that was the last piece of the puzzle. And that pushed me over the threshold and allowed me to accept the shroud as authentic, because it gave me a scientific, credible answer to the last question I had. My life is better by 1,000% than before, because the shroud is in my life. So as a Jew, maybe the greatest irony from my life, I'm a Jew who can say that my faith in God was restored by my study of the Shroud of Turin.
The clues that had been brought to light by the scientific research now made a medical examination of the image on the shroud possible. This examination revealed that this man had indeed been subjected to torture, and that he had died by crucifixion.
We don't see a man that's just dead. We see a man whose face is swollen because his face was beaten. And you can actually see one cheek is more swollen than the other, but both are. There are scourge marks from a Roman flagrum, which was a whip with 3 leather thongs, and at the end of each was a lead weight that's shaped like a dumbbell, the weightlifters use. And his body is covered with these scourge marks, over 120.
In flagellation, as applied by the Romans, the blows not only tore the skin, but, as a result of their energy, which was absorbed in a few microseconds, they caused extremely serious internal lesions.
Extrêmement grave. C'est une torture abominable.
It is truly a horrible torture.
C'est un homme qui a la...
This was a man who, at the end of the scourging, was going to die. His kidneys had ceased to function. He was losing liters of blood. He was completely dehydrated. The man on the cross had no more than a few hours left.
Quelques heures.
More amazingly, those crucifixion wounds in the hands, the bloodstains on the shroud show crucifixion through the wrist, because the Romans knew if they crucified in the palm, you could tear it loose. But if they nail you here, and the nail comes here, you can never pull this loose. We also see bloodstains covering his head, as if from a cap or crown of thorns. But not the beautiful things that the artists show us. Oh, the Roman soldiers were not going to take the time to weave a beautiful crown. They took a bush of thorns and smashed it onto his head, causing bleeding all over his head.
Every thorn that touched his flesh would have been like an electric shock for a few seconds or even several minutes. We can hardly imagine this when we read in the Gospels, they crucified him.
And we see a wound on his side. The darkest blood stain on the entire shroud is from this wound. And the blood actually went around to his back. So we have this bloody cloth with all these wounds, and it is a perfect match to what it tells in the Gospels was done to Jesus.
This is Jesus. This is his testimony. Here is what I have done for you. Here is what the Gospels say. Here is what I'm saying. I confirm them. Here is what I have done.
I was completely overwhelmed because a naked body, which had been tortured, with traces of blood which were only too visible, should really have made me want to run away. But funnily enough, this was not what I saw. I saw a body, more than just a body, a person who seemed infinitely reassuring, filled with peace. And this wave of peace reached out to me too. And I received a very deep and indelible certainty, as though he was right in front of me and he'd said to me, "Don't worry, suffering does not have the last word. Death will not swallow you up. I've been there before you."
Je pouvais dire que je l'avais rencontré.
I could say that I met him. I could say, like Froissart, he exists, I've met him, this Jesus of 2,000 years ago. I can say that I've seen him face to face. And this wave of peace, I have to say that it's...
Le Verbe,
The Word was made flesh, the Logos. He who is the Word, he who is the truth, the life, he assumed a human body.
il s'est mis à notre
He has placed himself within our reach
pour que
so that we can reclaim our dignity.
Or, c'était nous
Surely it is our grief that he himself bore, our sorrows which he carried.
C'est comme s'il avait pris le
It's as though he took the worst upon himself in order to allow us to breathe again and to continue to live after our difficulties and trials.
seulement lui
He alone is able to transform our suffering.
la souffrance. Le corps
And the risen body came out of this fabric of death.
et justement
And in the same way, he invites us to this same resurgence, this resurrection, and he shows us that we don't have to remain in the depths, but that his presence alone is itself a reassurance and can overcome anything.
elles sont extrêmement belles.
His hands are very beautiful.
Quand je pense que
When I think that these are the hands which multiplied the loaves, which blessed the children and touched the blind,
toucher les aveugles. Je vois
I see a man who is respectful,
qui a
who's afraid of making me afraid.
parce que Dieu est
Because God is a little shy. He's shy because he's a beggar for our love. Our God, who is all-powerful, who could make the galaxies dance, is poor before me because he is waiting until I am ready to open my door for him.
ouvrir ma porte.
Who originally owned the Shroud of Christ, and how did it pass through history to end up in Turin?
Now, the history of the Shroud of Turin, particularly its earliest ownership, is steeped in mystery and debate. According to Christian tradition, the Shroud of Turin is believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, used to wrap his body after the crucifixion. However, the early history of the shroud is not well documented, and its journey from the tomb to its later public appearances is clouded by gaps and legends. The first recorded mention of a cloth believed to be the burial shroud of Christ appears in the 14th century. However, there are earlier accounts and relics in Christian history that might refer to the shroud. According to the Gospels, Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy follower of Jesus, was the one who asked Pontius Pilate for the body of Christ after his crucifixion. He placed the body of Jesus in his own tomb and wrapped him in linen, as was customary at the time. Matthew 27:57-60, Mark 15:43-46, Luke 23. The Gospel accounts indicate that Joseph provided the burial cloth, which could suggest he was the original owner of what later became known as the shroud. After Joseph of Arimathea, the fate of the shroud becomes more speculative. It's possible that the early Christian community in Jerusalem preserved the cloth as a relic. Some scholars believe that it could have been kept hidden due to the persecution of Christians during the first few centuries of the Roman Empire. There are various theories that the cloth was transported to different parts of the Christian world during the early centuries, especially as relics associated with Jesus became highly valued. By the 6th century, historical records mention a mysterious cloth called the Image of Edessa, or the Mandelion. This cloth was reportedly kept in the city of Edessa, modern-day Şanlıurfa in Turkey, and was said to bear an image of Christ's face. Some scholars argue that this image of Edessa could have been the shroud, folded in such a way that only the face was visible. Legend has it that King Abgar V of Edessa received the cloth, which was believed to have miraculous powers. The cloth reportedly disappeared for some time before being rediscovered in the walls of Edessa and then transferred to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, in 944 AD. This movement of the cloth is considered a key link in the Shroud's journey from the early centuries to the later Middle Ages. One of the most mysterious chapters in the Shroud's history involves the Knights Templar. After the sacking of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, the Shroud reportedly disappeared. Some believe that the Templars, who were deeply involved in the Crusades, secretly took possession of the Shroud. It is speculated that they kept it hidden for over a century before it reappeared in the 14th century. There are even suggestions that the veneration of a head or face by the Templars during their secretive rituals could be tied to the image on the Shroud. The Shroud re-emerged in 1354 when it was displayed by the French knight Geoffroy de Charny in the small town of Lire, France. Geoffroy claimed to have come into possession of the Shroud, though the exact details of how he acquired it remain unclear. This marked the first public appearance of the Shroud in history. Geoffroy's descendants continued to care for the Shroud until the Savoy family, one of Italy's most influential dynasties, took possession of it in 1453. The Savoy family would eventually transfer the Shroud to Turin, where it remains today in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. While the Gospels suggest that Joseph of Arimathea may have been the original owner of the Shroud, its history over the centuries is filled with mystery, legends, and gaps in the record. Whether the Shroud passed through Edessa, Constantinople, or the hands of the Knights Templar, one thing is certain. By the time it reappeared in the 14th century, the Shroud had already captured the imagination and devotion of many, a legacy that continues to this day. Share your opinion as to what you think about the Shroud being authentic in the comment section, and please do subscribe. Thanks for watching.